Now, an awful lot of people know that they have to pay close attention to how they're performing an exercise, the actual movement of the exercise, not only so that they're effective, but also so that they don't get hurt. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't pay very close attention to how they actually move the weights to the exercise. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have a stand, for example, you're going to be required to lift these weights from the floor. And even if you have a stand, there's going to be many times where you set them on the floor between exercises. This is just something that's very important. We don't want to hurt our backs getting ready to do the exercise. So, what do you know about lifting? Lifting things from the floor. Let's review some of the things. You've always heard lift with your legs, right? Well, that's okay, but I'd like for you to think one step beyond that. I'd like for you to think about what your back or your spine itself is doing while you're lifting with your legs. So, if you have your dumbbells on the floor, I would suggest you putting them close enough that you can put your legs around them so the weights are between your feet, and scoot up over them. Don't be back here trying to lift something that's way out in front of you, because that just adds stress to your spine. So once you're in the right position, consider this. I'm going to try my best to, as I bend my knees, to bend my hips and stick my hips out, and I'm going to try my best to keep my rib cage up and out. Now watch what I mean. As I start to bend forward and keep my rib cage out, that allows me to get all the way down while keeping my back pretty straight. Now I don't mean vertical, but I mean pretty straight and flat, at least from head to my butt. And you can see what I mean by that. Now the common mistake is to keep the hips tucked under, as if you're afraid somebody's going to kick your bottom when you stick it out, or to start slouching from the top and let your rib cage collapse, because that's how I end up with the rounded spine that we don't want to see. So watch. Let's put it into play. Hips out, chest out, bring the weights up. There you go. And we can take them over to whatever exercise we're going to do, and then here's the part you're liable to forget. Even if you lifted it correctly, we've got to lower it correctly. So put everything into practice again. By having your feet wider, it makes it a little easy to make the squat down. Now you may want to have the weights wider and try to stand between them so the weights are on the outside of you. I don't suggest that. It is really hard to keep your spine in the right position with your feet close together and the weights out wide. So again, review this. This is the best way while raising and lowering the weights to keep from injuring your spine. Now many of you may have purchased a stand so you can set your SelectTech dumbbells right up on top, and it definitely makes it easier in terms of lifting them and getting ready for the exercise, but you still have some concerns relative to your back and lifting. You don't get to be mindless about grabbing these dumbbells and yanking them up. So take a look again. I'm going to suggest you keep the same things in mind as if you were lifting it from the floor, only it's much easier because you're not having to go so far down. So again, if you're going to choose to lift both of these at the same time, notice I'm not just bending to them. I'm using my legs, my hips, to lower myself to them. And keeping this spinal position, I can lift up one at a time, or I could obviously bring them up both at the same time. Now, let me give you another alternative. Because of the V shape of the stand, which is great for allowing the dumbbells to be in the proper angle to grab them, it may be comfortable for some of you to do more of a lunge type position, one foot in front of the other, keeping the same spinal position in mind the whole time. And again, just because you get them up, do your exercise, doesn't mean that you now get to set them down any way you want to. So don't just mindlessly walk up here and go to a crummy spinal position to get rid of the dumbbells. Take your time to set yourself up, stick your hips out, keep your rib cage out, and keep that spine safe. I've got Josh here now to help me show you something very important. When you get a little heavier with the dumbbells, and they're a little more challenging to you, sometimes it's pretty tough to get them in position, like when you're lying down for some kind of pressing exercise, and even tougher to get out of that position. So here are some tricks for you. First of all, Josh is going to show you, kind of review the lifting from the floor with a little twist to it, with a little different thing. I'm going to have him lift up one at a time, and because his knees are bent, he's just going to set one of them here, set the other there, because he's not standing all the way up with them, he's just going to sit down. So by doing them one at a time, much easier on your back. Now, watch this. One of the mistakes people make is as they sit back, they just let their arms collapse and end up on the bench with the weights right here by their chest, and sometimes have a tough time getting out of that deeper position that you might not even go to during your exercise. But watch Josh. He's going to use his knees, his legs, to get in a position just about a little bend in his arms, but he could straighten it right out. Did you see that? That was perfect, Josh. Now, let's say that he's finished his set. He's got two choices. One of them is at the last rep, he could leave the weights at the bottom. So let's go down to the bottom, and he's saying, I'm finished now, I'm ready to sit up. But you know what? It's hard to sit up with 100 pounds right up here, as you can see. But if he had stopped at the top on his last rep and said, okay, I'm done, that's my last rep. Now, think about this. Turn the dumbbells, keep the arm straight. Bring the knees up and use the arms like a lever, and they will bring you all the way up. Now that takes a little bit of practice, but I want you to work on it. And you can even review this thing over and over on your DVD. And then before you set them down, remember, lowering them is as important as picking them up. So Josh is going to put his feet wide, stick his hips out, keep his chest sticking out to the front so he's got the perfect spinal position. And that is exactly how you do it. The final little safety tip is not so much for your safety, but for the safety of your investment. You see, this SellInCost dumbbell is a piece of technology. It's not like a piece of metal that you find in the gym that you can just toss around and not have to worry about. Inside of this SellInCost, as we mentioned before, is a locking mechanism. This mechanism is very important because it makes sure that when you're using the dumbbell, the weights won't come off, the dial can't turn. Now, if you don't take care of this product and you just toss them around, drop them, even from this low height right here, may take once, may take a lot of times, but you keep dropping them, this thing can break, the all-important locking mechanism. So listen, take care of this product. It'll be around for your entire life to help you with your health goals if you take care of it, take care of your investment. So if you'll remember, I told you I was going to tell you all about the secrets of exactly how to perform the 4-step rep. So let's do that right now. You see what most of us do. Josh, let's just see a normal rep that you see in the gym all the time. That's actually better than some of them you see, right? Where they're just throwing them around. But you know what? We can take that workout that would be created by that kind of repetition and we can just make it so much more efficient and so much more effective by doing these 4 steps. Watch carefully. First, before you move, tighten. That's right. Tighten the muscles before you move. So you're preparing, you're saying, hey, I'm going to use these guys and I'm going to make them work harder from the beginning than they even really have to for total effectiveness. And then, number 2, use them to squeeze through the motion. Now what he's thinking right now is, I'm not trying to lift the weight, I'm trying to bust these guys right here. The weight's going to go along for the ride. And as he nears the top, he's going, instead of the weight flying up like this, he's just trying to squeeze harder and harder and harder. And that's the 3rd step, is re-squeeze at the top, because now we're going back down for number 4. And the way back down, he's going to work just as hard from here. It's not about lowering the weight, it's about working the muscle like it's 1,000 pounds on the way down. And he's not going to skip any inch of motion. Every inch of motion he moves is deliberate and full of intention. Now that was something, right?
Yeah.
All right, so keep these 4 steps in mind. Tighten before you move. Squeeze through the motion, every inch of it. Don't waste anything. How much time do you have to waste in your pursuit of getting healthy and getting bigger muscles? You don't have time to waste. Make it start right here with every rep. 3rd one, tighten at the top. Tighten and fully squeeze it. And 4th one, work on the way down with every bit of muscle that you can use like it's 1,000 pounds. And if you do this on every rep, it'll totally change the effectiveness of your workout. Now we're going to go through all the exercises and reinforce how to do it with each one of those. But this is going to be the most valuable thing you'll ever do in the gym or with your SellInCost dumbbells. Now we already showed you how to get in position for this flat bench chest press. So let's look at the rest. First thing is how to get your body into the exact position for the exercise. Take a look. Notice this is your position when you first lay on the bench, and the first thing Josh does is kind of tuck his shoulder blades back and together. And we're going to try our best to keep pretty much that position the whole time. Why? Because that will dramatically influence the amount of work done by these muscles right up here. Now watch as he lowers using the muscle, with the weights going, or the arms going almost straight out, not too high like this, but almost straight out to the side. And he stops when the arms get just about even with the bench. Can you see that? Now he's going to think about keeping his rib cage high and keeping his shoulders back as he brings the arms towards the center. He is not thinking about lifting the weights up, because that's not what these muscles do. These muscles bring your arms to the center. So watch again as he's thinking about chest high, shoulders back and tight, and he's coming towards the center, because that's what these muscles obviously do. Look at that. Now here's what happens if you let go of that. He comes down And sometimes if you're thinking about just press, just push, just lift up, and he throws his shoulder blades forward, he lets his sternum or his rib cage drop, and look, there's not nearly as much going on in the muscles that he's hoping to work right now. So one final time, and work on this with a light weight. If you got a heavy weight, you're not going to be able to work on the control you need. That's a good place to stop. Not too much lower than that, and control towards the center, and that is perfect. The incline press we could actually do on the bench in a variety of incline settings. Right now I've got the bench in the first setting above flat, which is about 30 degrees. We could also do it at 45. You could even do it at 60, although the contribution of the involved muscles will be very different. You might want to stick closer to the 30 degree, maybe the 45, but they're all options. Now, first thing we're going to do again is consider tucking the shoulder blades together and behind, not up by the ears, but together, like you're pinching them back and keeping them there, tucking them into the bench. Now, with that, the rib cage is nice and high, and you're going to watch Josh slowly take the arms straight out to the side, stops when they're just about the height of the bench, and then bring together, keeping that rib cage super high and super tight. Now watch again. He stops with lots of control, and then he's lifting with these guys, bringing the arms together, because that's what these muscles do. It's not just a lift straight up, because watch what happens if Josh thinks, oh, I'm just going to lift straight up, and he throws everything forward. He loses his retracted shoulder blades, and he loses the effectiveness if these muscles are what he's concerned about. So one more time, lots of control, 4-step rep, tighten, squeeze through the motion, squeeze at the top. That's perfect. Now we're going to take a look at the flat bench chest fly. Now there are a couple things I want you to consider here. Number one, a lot of people use flies to get a huge stretch. Once you realize you should never move any further than what you can just move your shoulder back just when you're standing like this. So we're not going to go as far back as a lot of people suggest because it's safer for the shoulder. And another thing, this is going to almost be a hybrid between a press and a fly. In other words, we're not going to have your arm near straight. It's going to be closer to the bend that you had when you're doing a press because it's much safer on your shoulder that way. Now watch carefully. Instead of turning the dumbbells all the way to being parallel, we're just going to let him go at slight angle, and there's a good reason for that. Now we're going to have him slowly go outwards and keep just a little bit of a bend. There you go. So his weights are just slightly outside of his elbows. In the press they were right over the elbows most of the time. Notice everything else is the same. He's got his shoulders pitched back. He's got his ribs up. Let's see it one more time, Josh. He goes out and he takes, you could even have a little more bend in your elbows. No, bend, not straight. There you go. Now notice he stops when his arm again gets about even with the bench. And right back up, keeping the rib cage high. One more. Super slow control, lowering up to 1,000 pounds. Now lift high, lift here, squeeze with the chest towards the center. That is a pretty good fly. This is the incline fly. Now we're going to make it a little different than the more traditional fly where your arm is almost straight and you're reaching way down to get a lot of range. We're going to make it the safest fly possible on this incline using an option of 30-degree incline, 45-degree incline. You make the decision on that. Maybe different ones on different days, but watch carefully. We're going to turn the dumbbells ever so slightly. You don't have to turn them all the way to where they face each other like they show you in a lot of exercise manuals on the fly. Just a little bit, and there's an important reason for that relative to the shoulder. But now, instead of the weights being over the elbow, like in a press, they're going to be out a little wider. Just a little bit. Now, he still stops with his arms about straight out to the side, about bench level, and then thinks about bringing them together, not up, but together, squeezing the chest and all the muscles related here. Now again, control it out, control it out. There's no wasted motion. Keeping the chest high, shoulders back. Josh was showing one more rep, and here's what happens if you reach out too far forward and his shoulders come out and he drops his chest, and we're just not getting anywhere near the same effect here. So one more time with a good one. Tucking them back, controlling them out, stop, tighten the muscles, squeeze to the center, keep it tight. Now re-tighten at the top like you're really trying to squeeze them, and that's a great incline fly. Let's take a look at the declined chest press. Now we've got the bench in the position where it's angled head down, and notice we've got the pad on down here so that he can use his feet and his lower leg to keep from sliding down. Now, the first thing we're going to do is, again, set the shoulder blades, as we mentioned in the flat chest press, and we're going to try our best to keep them pretty close to that shrugged together position behind him and keep that rib cage nice and high. Now, he's going to control the weights ever so slowly down so that he can find the perfect place for him to stop, which is no lower than arms straight out to the side. and then he's going to think about drawing them together towards the center. Not a press up, but a pulling together with these muscles towards the center. One more time, really slow and controlled. 4-step rep, tighten the squeeze to the top of the muscle. Slow, 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 and squeeze. Notice he did not do this. He did not throw his shoulders forward. Show him what happens when you just throw it, Josh. And see how those shoulders came forward and they spread apart from behind the bench and actually diminished some of the effectiveness of the exercise here. So keep them tucked back, and you have to practice this with a light weight. And the better you practice, the better you get at it, the more you'll get out of the exercise. Now, we could also, from this position, do a decline fly. Probably not with the same workout weight, because the fly is going to be with the arm a little bit further out, the weight further out, so it's going to need to be a lighter weight. We're going to show you with the same weight just for saving time. Now, we're going to turn the dumbbells just a little bit, and this time, instead of the weight staying over the elbow, it's going to be slightly outside of the elbow. He's still going to stop when his upper arm is about straight out to the side, even with the bench. And then again, use those muscles to pull back towards the center one more time, controlling it out. Let your elbows bend a little bit more. There you go. You don't want to reach out with a straight arm. And then pull towards the center, keeping those shoulder blades back, and that is perfect. We're looking at standing curls in general, but under this name, standing curl, we've got dozens of variations that I'd like for you to consider and strategically put them in place at different points, maybe during different workouts, during different weeks, during different months, maybe even alternating from set to set. But take a look. The first thing we've got to do is get the form down perfectly for a curl, the form that's going to give you the most results. And here's the most common mistake I'd like for you to consider first. You've seen it in gyms all the time, but someone more interested in lifting the weight, and because of that, they're not paying any attention to their body. Now watch Josh as he performs the perfect mistake for us. See how his arm went back and then it went forward? He just guaranteed that he was getting as little stimulation as possible for the muscles that he's probably wanting to work. Let's see that one more time. The big mistake, elbow goes back, elbow goes forward. You see, that made it really easy for him. We're actually trying to make it harder for these muscles. We want to stimulate him to change. So here's what he's going to do. Notice that when he performs this, his elbow will not go backwards or forwards. It will stay right here. Now, he doesn't have to smash it into his side, but watch as he performs. The weight will move in an arc, and that arc goes out and up and in. But this upper arm didn't move forwards or backwards. You must work on this. If you really want to stimulate this biceps brachialis, brachioradialis, all these guys on the front right here, you've got to do this. You've got to not let that arm move. So you get enough weight off of there that you can make this happen, and then we'll start talking about working out, okay? That's a perfect one. Then you plug in that 4-step rep, things are going to start happening. Now let's look at some of the variations. Here's a couple right off the bat. You can change shoulder position. Josh, turn your arms outward a little bit. Little external rotation of the shoulder. Slight variation just changes things ever so slightly, but all the same rules apply. Keep this upper arm where it started. Now, we're going to play another little game. And this is, you've got to be super picky. You've got to get in the mirror. You've got to see what you're doing. But Josh is going to bring his upper arm a little bit forward to start with. And he's going to keep it there. So it's not, now look, it's not so far forward. Bring it all the way up for me. If he comes up and it's too far forward, then his this forearm, it just gets balanced and he's doing nothing again. He's bringing it just a little bit forward and then starting there, but see how it stays there? And when he's at the top, he's still got gravity pulling on his arm. It's not balanced, but it's a very slight shoulder position that actually makes it even tougher from the beginning because it's not just hanging there in a balanced position from the start. And that's a little bit tougher, isn't it, Josh?
Oh, yeah.
Now, for each one of those three, he can do these things. He can alternate, so just leave one up and take the other one down, and do them at the same time. What we call simultaneously alternating. Still got to go slow, still got to think, still got to use the muscles. He could just set one down. Give me one of these. He could just do them one at a time, and you know there's a tremendous benefit to doing one at a time because when you're trying to do both, your brain is trying to send information to this one and to this one, and you know what? It's splitting its efforts. When you do one, you truly are stronger on that one side because the neurological energy, so to speak, is going to one, and you get a lot more accomplished. So consider it unilateral work, even though it takes a little longer. So alternating, bilateral, unilateral, for each one of those, and you know what? For each one of those variations, show him what we got here, Josh. He can supinate on the way up, which means going from palm facing your leg to palm facing the ceiling. Or he could do like you saw him a minute ago, just start in supination and keep it there the whole time, not letting go of any of the other things we discussed. Very important. Josh, go ahead and set those right back in the rack. Here's something that's really cool that you can only do on a SelectTech dumbbell. You can't do it in the gym at all. I don't care how many dumbbells you have in the gym. Because we dial in each end separately, I can adjust this to be unbalanced in a sense. I can put it on 17.5 on this side, which puts one less weight on this side, still have it on the 20 on this side. What's that going to do? Well, grab it, Josh, and take a look. I put the lighter side on his thumb side of the dumbbell, the heavier side on his pinky side. Now, when he does his supination with his curl, this side that's doing the moving is loaded. It's a little bit heavier. So now we have not only resistance against the arm curl, but resistance against the supination as well. Let's take a look at a curl that's commonly known as the concentration curl. Now, typically, people will do this by grabbing the weight and resting their elbow against their leg. And the reason they typically do that is, as we found out in the beginning, when someone starts to lift, their first attempt at cheating is letting the elbow go back. So to solve that problem, they try to use something outside of their body, like their leg, to rest it against. Well, it doesn't solve the problem. You'll watch most of the people doing this when they put their elbow on their knee, they just take their shoulder forward instead of their elbow back. It still accomplishes the same cheating type of goal. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do if you really want something out of this exercise. Let your arm hang and use your muscles to keep it there. Just like we did in the beginning with the standing curls. Don't let your elbow go back. Don't let it go forward. And look at that perfect control. We can do the 4-step rep, nice and controlled, tighten. Squeeze to the top, squeeze, 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 nice and slow. Squeeze it again at the top. Now let it all the way down like it's 1,000 pounds. Notice his upper arm didn't move a bit. He can also do it by angling more to the front instead of across his body. There's a very slight variation that's pretty cool. And if you don't have a bench, you don't need one. Josh, go ahead and stand up and show him how you can just bend all the way over, resting your other arm on your knee, and just letting that arm hang straight down again with the same control. One myth about this exercise, it's commonly thought that doing this exercise will help to improve the peak on your bicep. If you've ever heard that, if you haven't, you'll read it sooner or later in one of these magazines that's out there. The truth is that because of the shoulder position, it makes the thing look different when you're using it, but it's not necessarily augmenting or enhancing that. It's just the new appearance because of the new shoulder position. This is an inclined curl. Now this is unique because it's one of the few opportunities to change the length of the involved muscles, at least the biceps, and put them in a longer starting position. Now this is getting maybe a little deeper than you wanted to know, but let's just suffice it to say that this new shoulder position is an important variable. So let's just do this one side for right now, Josh. We'll just do unilateral or one-sided work. And notice his shoulder is in what we call extension, meaning it's behind his body a little bit. His arm is hanging behind his body. And that is at a specific angle determined by this bench being at the 60-degree setting. Now his goal is going to be similar to all the other curls in that he wants to keep this upper arm right here. If he, squeeze all the way through, it's just perfect. Now control it back down. That's phenomenal 4-step rep control. Now it would be a mistake if he let his arm come forward as he did this. He'd be wasting the whole potential of this curl in its new shoulder position. So I shouldn't say it's a complete waste of time, but he's not taking advantage of what this specific curl has to offer. Now, like most curls, he could go ahead and do them both at the same time. He could have kept doing the unilateral. He could do the alternating. He could start playing with the grip, meaning he could supinate as he comes up, or he could keep the supination like he did before. There's a lot of great options for a really great curl. Now, if you find that you have pretty good shoulder range of motion, you could probably put the bench back just one more notch to the 45-degree angle, but never any lower than that. Never any lower than that, because 45 to 50 degrees is the most extension that anybody has in their shoulder, at least any healthy extension that they have in their shoulder. So we're not going to try to do this any lower, but there are two good options for you, and really most people will probably enjoy the 60-degree angle the best. This curl is called the preacher curl or the Scott curl, depending on who's writing the article or what magazine you read or what era you're from even. But the idea is that you have some kind of a bench that has an angle built into it. For our bench, we're going to use the back of our back pad right here, but we're going to angle it at the 60-degree or the next to the highest possible angle. And I'm going to show you why that specific angle is ideal for us. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do them one at a time, and Josh is going to lean over the bench here. Now you're going to notice he's resting his arm on the pad, but you've got to be very specific about how you do this. Again, you can do anything you want to, but if you want the most out of this, you don't want to waste your time, watch. Now the common problem is here, people dive their elbow into the thing, and when they go down, see how the elbow's against, and they rock around. They're using everything except the muscles they think that they really, really want to see here. So here's the trick. Smash that top part of the arm against the pad, the top part up here by your body. And notice his elbow is actually kind of hovering over the pad, and it never even smashes my fingers when I'm down here. In fact, to help encourage you to keep from letting that elbow dive into the pad, think about letting the weight out and curling it in. Those cues will seem to help you stabilize better than just thinking up and down. Because as soon as you think about going down, that elbow will drop. So he's thinking about reaching out and curling in. Now he's got his 4-step rep going. Now here's the cool thing, curl it as far as you can. Notice that as far as he can curl, it still doesn't end up balanced over his elbow. He's still got great resistance there. That's because he's up here at the 60-degree angle. If we put him at the 45-degree angle, then his arm would not be here, it would be more angled, and we got up to the top, the weight would be balanced, he'd be doing no work whatsoever. No work whatsoever. This is the perfect preacher or Scott bench curl. You can see it's working hard. He could supinate on the way up, he could keep it in supination, all those things we discussed on other curls. The one myth I'd like to bring up is that a lot of people say this lengthens your bicep, this helps fill in this gap. This curl has some trick that makes you work harder down at this end of your bicep. Folks, that is physiologically impossible. That is not going to happen. The only way to fill in this gap would be if you surgically cut and shorten the tendon. So what you see is what you get here. It is a great curl though. Let's take a look at a hammer curl and a variation on a hammer curl. Now that traditional name hammer curl came from the grip associated with using a hammer. So we call this neutral in terms of the forearm grip. And you're going to see Josh here holding in that position and going through a traditional curl nice and slow. The key here again being the 4-step rep. So that as he starts this, we're going to see a tension before you move, a pulling of everything, squeezing everything all the way through the range as far as he can smash that muscle, and then tighten at the top, work it down like it's 1,000 pounds, and then of course he could do alternating, simultaneously alternating, one at a time, all these things, all that serves a slightly different purpose. And then here's another variation. I'm going to have him turn about, watch the camera angle here, about 45 degrees. So in essence, he's leading with that first knuckle. So it's not straight up, it's about a 45-degree angle, and we're still going to go right back to our curl. So it's a variation on the hammer curl that slightly alters the participation in some of the muscles right down here, very slightly, not that big a deal, but really nice to have all these variations when you start getting used to things. This is what creates change, people. It's what stimulates things to adapt. You get muscle, you get strength with the least amount of wear and tear inside the body. Now we're going to look at some versions of overhead tricep work. The first thing you need to ask yourself is how comfortable are you with your shoulders up or your arms up in this position? Because if you're uncomfortable with it, you need to look at some of the other options we're going to present in a few minutes. Josh is going to do fine with these things. We've already taken a look. The first example is using both arms, one dumbbell. So let's go ahead and go up overhead. Now the trick here, the reason this is so difficult for so many people, it's not just getting the arms all the way up, but keeping the elbows pretty much over the shoulders. Josh is good at doing that, keeping that position. Now notice that he doesn't let the elbows go real wide. He doesn't turn it into a press looking thing. He's trying to keep these upper arms relatively stable, just like we did in the curls, just like we did on everything else. And he's moving his hands in an arc so the dumbbell goes up and over his head as he progresses along, and he can bring in that 4-step rep. The one I think that's going to work for most of you is the one dumbbell, one arm. Let's try that, Josh. Unilateral. So we're going to get obviously a much lighter resistance here. Now, you know, you could do that exercise we just looked at. You could do that in standing if you chose to. But look at this. Because he's not trying to reach back and turn both hands like this, he can go across. And going across is much easier on most people's shoulders, just in terms of getting into position. Nice and slow and controlled. Tightening right here. Let's play 4-step rep here for a second. Going up to the top. Now let's squeeze first. Now control it down like it's 1,000 pounds. Reaching across to the other shoulder. Now tighten before you move. Now cramp all this and squeeze to the top. Don't throw it, don't throw it. Squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it, and cramp it at the top all the way straight. Working that hard, you will get so much out of this exercise. But notice the strict form with which he kept this upper arm from moving around all over the place. You've got to watch for those really strict, important things. Now there is one variation you can perform when you're doing one dumbbell across the body by bringing the bench up at an angle. Josh, hang on there for a second. I'll bring the bench up to the 60 degree or almost the highest angle. And now he's just going to cross it slightly to the front. Obviously reaching over far enough that he doesn't get anywhere near his face. But notice the same control, the same concern for the 4-step rep and the intention put in to working the tricep. This exercise is commonly called the tricep kickback. Now, it's not necessarily one of my favorite exercises in its original form, but I'll show you a really cool variation. So the traditional exercise is this, that you're somehow supporting yourself in this horizontal position in your torso. Your arm is in the same position, your upper arm is parallel to your torso, and then you're simply straightening backwards, nice and slow. See, this is perfect. If you can do it like this, and it takes a pretty light weight because Josh is getting his arm all the way straight. And the problem is most people start with too heavy a weight because when you're at the bottom position, there's no resistance. It's just hanging below your elbow. And then in order to get it all the way straight, they have to swing it and throw it, and they pretty much just end up wasting their time. This is perfect. Again, watch one more time as he squeezes into the fully straightened position. If you're not doing that, don't even bother. That is perfect. Now I'll show you the variation that's cool because it changes where the exercise is hard and where it's easy. So Josh, go ahead and put your elbow down there. He's going to actually kind of decline his torso, but notice he's not throwing his head up, putting it into extension. He's looking down also. But his arm is at that same angle. Now what that's going to do for us is he now has resistance at the starting position. And as he straightens his arm out, it goes past the toughest position. He gets a little more range and a little better resistance profile. In other words, where it's hard and where it's easy is different from the first exercise. Now, if you don't like being in this position, don't worry about it. You don't have to do it. But if you like variation, you like changing things up, which is truly what it takes for true stimulation all the way around and getting everything you can out of your body, I'd like for you to try this. This is a great exercise, and just look at his tricep right there. Now we're going to look at some lying versions of the tricep extensions. Take a look. Notice Josh has got both dumbbells. He's got them parallel to each other, and he's starting with his arm straight up 90 degrees from his torso. Now he's going to keep his upper arm there real strictly, and as he lowers using his tricep with tremendous control, he's going to see what he feels like, how far he wants to go, and then use this to tighten and straighten right back out. Notice his upper arms did not move a bit. Show them what happens on the common mistake there, Josh, where people move their arm one way and then move it the other way in the back up. It's like a whole shoulder thing. So he did a perfect job. Let's see that one more time in the beginning. Now with this, he could do an alternating thing where one stays, yep, we do that. All these alternating or unilateral versions, they're tremendous exercises. You just got to keep the same slow, controlled pace the whole time. Now, we can one-up it. Here's a cool thing to do. Make it even harder at the starting position by going away from the 90-degree angle to where it's actually over his head a little bit more. But see, now it's not balanced at the start. So he's actually working harder at the very start, but he keeps him there. The angle didn't change as he went up and went down. And that's tremendous control, and that shows advanced technique by Josh right here. So that looks great. Again, we could alternate. We could do all those things. And I'm going to steal this one from Josh, and we're going to show you one final little trick, which is while lying supine, going across the body, nice and controlled. Watch that upper arm didn't move. Show them the common mistake again, Josh, where they let the arm fall this way and then they throw it that way. Not what we want. Upper arm, where it starts is where it stays. Now realize that for all these different variations I just showed you, you could not only do them in the flat bench, but if you have this cool bench, you could do it up at 30 degrees, which is just the next one up, and you could even do all of these from the declined position. We're going to look at some forearm exercises, and the first one is the wrist curl or wrist flexion. Now this bench is nice and wide down here at the seat end of it, so you can use these long dumbbells at the same time, no problem. Now there's one little thing I'd like you to be really concerned about here. See, one of the common things that happens is that people let the dumbbell roll all the way down their fingers. They're thinking, oh, we'll work my finger muscles, my grips type stuff at the same time. I really would ask you not to do that, because in order to relax and let your fingers roll down, people usually completely relax and almost hyperextend the wrist. And if you've ever seen a little skeleton hanging in the doctor's office, there's a bunch of really small little bones in here, and that's not a great idea. So keep the grip tight and just perform the wrist motion like Josh is doing right here. To apply the 4-step rep, think about what's going on up here in the forearm. Do the tightening and squeezing, controlling down like it's 1,000 pounds. Tighten, squeeze through the motion. Don't ever get in that fast, sloppy thing, and you'll have some great results from this exercise. Now we're going to take a look at wrist extension. And it requires a little bit different position than the wrist flexion, because when you turn your palms face down to bring them up, extending backwards, you really need your elbows to be wider to achieve that position. It's hard to keep the elbows and the forearms close together while turning the palms all the way down. So I'm going to ask you not to use the bench, but in this case, rest your entire forearm up on your thigh so your elbows can be a little bit wider while you're going through the extension exercise. Again, go ahead and keep a pretty tight grip on that thing. Keep it pretty tight and just control it down, control it up. And folks, this is not a lot of weight you're going to be able to use here. These muscles are not that strong relative to other exercises you're used to doing. So don't use a bunch of weight and start throwing them around. Use what's appropriate to get the proper form accomplished. So we've got two little forearm exercises here, wrist exercises you could call them, that are really important to a lot of people, especially if they're involved in a lot of gripping sports or things where they really require a sturdy grip and strong wrists. Take a look at this. It's called radial and ulnar deviation. Radial for one direction, ulnar for the other. Now you don't need to know the big fancy word, you just need to know how to do it right, and here it is. It's so cool with a SelectTech dumbbell because you can load one side. So we've completely taken the plates off of one side by selecting 5, which is the lowest you can go. And we selected 12.5 on this other side that's by Josh's thumb. Now notice he's not going to move any of the rest of his arm up here, but just this little flexion towards the thumb side of his forearm. It's not a big motion. And no, you might not necessarily do it for general health and fitness, but you may run into a lot of very specific situations, because there's a lot of you that not only are required to do some things for some rehab if you've had some kind of carpal tunnel or some kind of tendonitis, but there's a lot of good situations for this. Now let's show the opposite, where all you do is put the loaded side on the pinky side of the hand, and then we're just going up the other direction. Now you'll know you're cheating if you're moving any of this stuff up here, because the only motion is at this joint, the wrist. It's not a big motion. Take it nice and slow. The smaller the motion, the slower you need to go through it. Now, if you remember on the wrist flexion exercise, I asked you to consider not doing the finger flexion at the same time, but to control that grip. Well, because of that, I do want to give you a flexion alternative for the fingers and for grip exercises. And if we do it in a standing position, very simply in a standing position, we can keep the wrist in neutral so it's not bent backwards or forwards at the same time, and in a controlled manner, slowly release your grip to let the weights roll down to the tips of your fingertips. Now again, control's the key here so it doesn't roll right off down to the floor, but then squeeze them right back up and really clench that fist. You don't necessarily have to do wrist flexion at the same time, but as you can see what Josh is doing, it's rolling down and curling back up and squeezing. And again, there's an awful lot of you who will need this for not only the strengthening to better perform in a sporting activity or any gripping activity, but also it's great for some versions of rehab, tendonitis, tennis elbow, carpal tunnel, all those kinds of things. Now the rolling exercises we're going to look at involve all of the muscles, pretty much all of them on the whole back of the torso up here, but mostly around the shoulder blade, the lats, the traps, the rhomboids, even the posterior deltoids, all of these guys. Now, we're going to start in a very specific manner, and we're going to progress up to the tougher exercises. I don't mean necessarily that they're just tougher to do. I mean tougher to stabilize for your spinal muscles. So watch, he's in a supported position here, one arm row, and watch the keys to what Josh is doing in terms of performance. Notice his shoulder blade movement in unison, the fluid motion between his shoulder blade and his arm. So as his arm goes down, the shoulder goes into protraction or reaches forward. And as he pinches back, his arm comes back. Now let's put this with a 4-step rep. Slow down there for a second, Josh. Let's take a look at this. First thing we're going to do is pinch shoulder blade together while thinking about bringing the arm right alongside the body, squeezing everything back here, squeezing, now cramp it at the top. Now start to control it down like it's 1,000 pounds, using all of these muscles, letting the shoulder blade go down with the arm, letting it stretch from here. A little bit of rotation of the spine, not much. Now I want to show you something. Let's go back down to the bottom here. Take a look. A lot of people have trouble with figuring out how to move the shoulder blade, and they don't feel like they're pinching it together. So let's practice. If Josh just lets his arm hang, he can do almost like a backward shrug. It's not a shrug up to the ear. It's a shrug backwards towards the other shoulder blade. And once you get to where you can feel that pretty well, then you put it together with one fluid motion with the arm. There you go. Now, let's progress from that to the next version, which is just simply not supported anymore. So you have to depend more on the muscles of your trunk and spine, but we're still going to do one arm, because that way we haven't added any more weight to it. We've just taken some stabilization away from it. So he's going to bend over, and he's got to bend all the way over, sticking that bottom out, keeping that back flat. And the same exact performance. Look where his head is pointed. He's looking straight down. That keeps him from putting his head into extension and getting a big kink in it. But watch shoulder blade and arm, same time, big squeeze, control it down. Real nice big stretch, pulling that shoulder blade into protraction. Now let's put both of them together. Here's where we move up. Gets tougher for the spine as well as for the things that you're moving up here with your posterior shoulder muscles. Lifting correctly, bending over correctly by sticking the bottom out, keeping the back real flat. Bend the knees almost like you're setting your stomach on your thighs. Now watch both of these pinch together as his arms come right by his sides. Reaching forward, let the shoulders protract, scapula protract. Now pinch together as the arms come up. That is perfect. Now we can add one more final twist to this by actually having him alternate. And what that means is one's going to go down as the other goes up. And this is a wonderful variation, not only including a little spinal rotation here, but also the coordination. And quite frankly, this is the way your body normally works, with things moving in opposite directions, just like when you're walking. This is a little variation on the row, and it's just by moving through a slightly different plane. From Josh's point of view, instead of bringing his arm by his side, it's going to be about 45 degrees away from his side. So take a look. He's going to do the supported version first, which is always the place to start learning this thing. And he's still going to bring shoulder blade into motion at the same time, when his arm is not tucked in, smashing against his side. It's out a little bit. And this is going to bring in different contribution of the related muscles, all the same muscles, but acting a little bit differently. And he's still got the nice shoulder blade pinch all going along at the same time. Now, we again could progress from that to stepping away from the bench, away from the one arm support, and still go one arm, but bent over all the way, parallel to the ground, nice back position, and watch the fluid motion of both the shoulder blade and the arm. Only the arm is away from the side again. Take a look. Now we can go ahead and go to the bilateral version. So go ahead and grab that other one there, Josh. Getting a good workout today. Now, both arms slightly away from the side. Still, shoulder blades pinching. Feels a little different, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Keep looking at the ground. There you go. So we're not out wide enough. We're not like this. Just halfway in between. There you go. And watch those shoulder blades. Now let's alternate the wide row, 45 degrees from the body. And that is exactly it. The deadlift is often called a back exercise, referring to the low back, the spinal erector muscles, but it's really just as much a hip exercise using your glutes and even some quads, because it's a close relative of the squat. The big difference is you're going to be bent forward more than in a traditional squat, which will of course involve more of that back. Now take a look. The first thing we're going to have Josh do is bring the weights from his sides more to the front, as if he was holding a barbell across the front. Why? Because the second that weight moves in front of or anterior to his center of gravity, all of those muscles in the back are engaged. They're helping him stand up straight right now, unlike when he had the weights by his side. Now he's going to do a couple things. Remember the lifting technique we talked about way back in the beginning that I know you watched, right? You're going to start by bending the knees and taking the hips, sticking the butt out the back, keeping that chest forward. Josh, go ahead. I'm going to let you go ahead and just look down a little bit so you're not putting your neck too far up in an extension. But notice he stopped when he got to about his knees. That's a great place to stop to make sure you're doing it just right. Now watch. He stops there. Look at that perfect spinal position, just the same one when he was standing up. Now it's not vertical like when he's standing, but the curves are the same. It's almost flat. And then he brings his hips back up under him. Now that he's proven competency in that, keep that chest out. He can go a little bit lower, about mid-calf, and back up, and that's probably as low as you'll ever need to go. But notice how he's bent more forward at the hips. In other words, his upper body is more parallel to the ground than with the traditional squat. And that's why all these guys are working so hard in here, but he's definitely feeling it down in the hips also. One more rep, concerned about the neck, concerned about the spine. Those are the things you got to watch for the whole time. You can never stop thinking about those things. There are several versions of the standing overhead press that I'd like to show you right now, but the most important thing to making those safe is going to be paying close attention to your spinal position. Don't stand with a big sway in your back. Keep those abdominals tight the whole time, and that sometimes is the toughest part of the exercise until you get used to it. Now, as far as the variations on the press, Josh, let's go ahead and start up here. Now take a look. He's starting in a pretty traditional wide press. Notice as he presses up, there we go. He presses towards the center. It's not straight up. Notice that nice arc over his head. And as he comes down, you can try coming on down lower if you want to, but I think you'll find it a little better if you just stop at about shoulder level. That's pretty nice. Now, he could do that plane of motion or that angle, but we could also bring him a little to the front, a little more to the front. Now, not all the way like this, but just at an angle. If you ever noticed when you lift a box or something, you don't do it with your arms all the way out, nor all the way in, but kind of halfway in the middle. That's where we are right now. But he still ends up and over the head. So they're coming together up and over the head. Now with either one of those choices of wide or a little bit narrower, he could do an alternating version. Let's see that. This is a great version. Nice and slow, 4-step rep. Tighten and reach. Actually reach high with it. Go slow, 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 slow. There you go. So reach all the way up. That's good. Or he could just hold one still and just do a unilateral or one-sided press and finish that one and then do the other one. He could even set down the dumbbell on that side while he finishes off one arm at a time. Now, all of our overhead shoulder press types of activities we can do from a seated version as well as the standing. In this example, we put the bench all the way upright into the 90-degree position, and then Josh can start with all of our overhead press options, meaning the wide version, where he starts out here and moves towards the center over his head. He could move his entire arm forward a little bit and press through this kind of 45-degree plane right here. He could go to an alternating option from this position, or he could just do one at a time. He could even set one weight down if he wanted to while he did that. Now, another thing we can do with this great bench is put it in the high angle, which is about a 60-degree angle. Now, a lot of people say, why would I want to do that? There's an awful lot of people who can't get their arm all the way overhead for a variety of reasons, old injuries, whatever. This makes a perfect overhead press for those people, and even for you if your arm goes all the way overhead. Variation is important for the joint, if nothing else, like we mentioned before, and for the mechanical wear on the joint. So this is a great option. Again, you can go through this plane, the 45-degree plane, and all the other options we mentioned on overhead presses before. Now, if you've ever been to a gym, you've seen some of the most horrendous lateral raises in existence probably. Some of them probably look like this. Josh, can you do some bad ones for us? See how he's just kind of swinging the weight around, and even when they're doing less of the swinging with the weight, there's still a bunch of leg stuff associated with it. Let's take a look. Sometimes you'll see people do what looks like pretty strict ones, but you can tell they're lifting more of the weight because the weight ends up being the thing that's the highest and lifted the furthest, and they're paying more attention to this. You even see wrist extension, meaning they're lifting that weight. Here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to imagine you're lifting my hand, if you're Josh, but you're thinking about lifting your elbow. Now the weight's going along for the ride. It's not falling down like this. It's not falling down. But your arm ends up being the highest point. And look at that slight arc to the arm here. Can you see that? That is a perfect lateral raise. And I'll tell you what, the first time you do that you slow down and do it right, and think about lifting the arm, not the weight, you will feel it like never before. So practice those. Work real hard. Let the shoulder blades move however they need to. It's important for this. And I'm going to show you one other variation. Because when you're standing up like this, you can tell there's certain muscles lined up against gravity pulling straight down. Well, we're going to change that a little bit. I'm going to have Josh bend forward at the hips, which means he's not bending in the spine. He's sticking his bottom out and bending his knees a little bit. But the arms are still hanging straight down, not back by his body. Now we're going to do the whole thing from there, which is going to align different parts of the deltoid up with gravity, still thinking about lifting the elbows. We're raising the arms, lifting the elbows out. That is a beautiful lateral raise. We're definitely working a lot of medial or middle deltoid as well as the rest of the deltoids and even the deeper rotator cuff muscles. Some trapezius involved, but watch carefully, go slow, be deliberate, and lift the arms, not the weight. Now we're going to talk about the front dumbbell raise, or just front shoulder raise. And a lot of people think this is just anterior deltoid, but it actually ends up being quite a bit of the middle deltoid involved too, as well as some of the deeper muscles, trapezius, that kind of stuff. But take a look. First off, just do one at a time. Bring it straight out to the front. You can see the muscles kind of jumping up here. But I'm going to suggest that definitely in the beginning, and you may always want to do, just the single arm or alternating versions. Now the reason I say that is because when you go to lift, go ahead and show them a bilateral both arm. Now see, that's a lot of weight way out in front, and that may end up being pretty tough on your low back. And you may progress up to that and it might be fine. But initially, by doing one arm at a time, it's a lot easier to control. Of course, you got to keep those abdominals tight on virtually every one of these exercises to control that spine and that low back. But you can also create some variation here. Josh could go ahead and turn, instead of doing a palm down version like he was, he could do a thumb up type version. And it's not that it changes things that much, but it is a nice change inside the shoulder joint, which is where we need to create variation sometimes to not get the wear and tear that a lot of doing the same exact exercise performance will cause. So he can alternate, same time, or set one dumbbell down and just finish off one arm completely before he goes on to the other one in a unilateral version. Now we're going to look at what's commonly called a rear delt exercise. Two things about it. Number one, it involves a lot more than the rear delt, a lot of scapular muscles, things around the shoulder blade, as well as some deep rotator cuff muscles. The biggest thing about the rear delt exercise is that the plane of motion, the path you move through, has to be pretty specific. Now, most people, because of the way they do it, never really address the rear delt. We'll show you what we mean. A lot of times you'll see people seated on the end of a bench. I'm going to highly recommend that you not sit on the end of a bench, because when you do that, in order to sit and bend over that far, you end up with a big curve in your spine. And so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and stand up and bend over much like we would a regular row. So you're bent over almost parallel to the ground, bend the knees, stick out the butt. And then the next thing, please don't turn this into a straight arm or almost fly type motion. Show them what I mean, Josh. Where you see people trying to do this, not only bobbing up and down, but by trying to keep their arms straight, they end up out of the plane. They're not straight out to the side. And they've rotated their arms so that that muscle, the posterior deltoid, is not getting the stimulation it could. Think of this more as a rear delt row, meaning you're going to let your forearm just dangle. So the weight's going to be right below your elbow, just hanging there. You're really worried more about moving your upper arm straight out to the side and then letting it come back towards the center. Straight out to the side. The forearm hanging straight down. That is perfect every time. And then you can see a huge difference in the muscles that this thing's actually named for. Now, what you do with your shoulder blades is kind of up to you. Josh is letting the normal flow of shoulder blade motion occur. He could also keep them shrugged if he wanted to, just like that. So more of the motion's coming from here and to be more isometric here. But either way, the key is the plane, and the key is letting the weights hang. Watch the back position, and you'll see these things work like never before. Now, a lot of people take shrugs for granted. They think, well, it's simple. We're just going to shrug our shoulders up, and that's it. There's really a little bit more to it than that. You see, the most common description or cue for a shrug is shoulders to ears. But honestly, if you take your shoulders forward towards your ears, that's not exactly what this muscle area is trying to do, and it's not as effective as it could be. So consider this. Two variations. Number one, taking the shoulders to the back of the head. Now in the process of doing that, you're going to see two variations as I mentioned. Number one, People will head towards the base of the spine, of the cervical spine right here, like they're shrugging up and inward immediately. Now, if you got a really heavy weight, that's where you're going to end up wanting to go because there's more muscle going that direction. There's a little bit less muscle doing the hard part of all the way up, and you see as Josh goes really high with those, he might even have to drop down to the 40s instead of the 50s that he's got right here to accomplish that because that's really tough. So consider that if you choose version number 1 versus version number 2. Again, the difference, going all the way up towards the top, or in your way of going to the top, in your attempt at going to the top, you're actually going towards the base of the neck right here. So it's kind of two variations here versus here, but not towards the ears. Now, if you've got this great bench, there are a couple other really neat variations, one of a lateral raise and one of a rear delt exercise that you can do. Take a look. Josh, go ahead and lay. I've got this in the 45-degree position. And in this position, you can do a version of a lateral raise, taking it straight up. Again, think about lifting the arm. The weight's going along for the ride. But we have what's called a different resistance profile here, meaning where it's harder is at a different point in the range than the traditional standing version, which is much harder here. Now it's harder for him down in this position. So this is a great exercise. A little bit different in that you can only do one at a time, obviously. Now, the rear delt variation is pretty cool too. Sit up. I'm going to lay this flat, and I'm going to have you come sit down here and lay with your head down the other way, Josh. Now, he's going to take his arm straight out in front, thumb down, and we're going to come straight up over the shoulder. So this is a whole lot of rear delt, a whole bunch of other shoulder muscles, of course, as well, but a tremendous variation if you have the bench. Of course, you could do this one on the floor, I guess, as well. To do the 45 for the lateral, you got to have the bench. All right, the next shoulder exercise is something very, very specific for a portion of what's called the rotator cuff. The back part of the rotator cuff performs external rotation, along with some other muscles like the posterior deltoid and a couple other guys. But take a look. This is a very, very tricky exercise, meaning you have to be specific. There's no powerlifting going on here. There's no throwing it around if you want to get this done right and done safely. So Josh is going to lie down on his side. And obviously, you'd have to trade off and do the other side here at the end. But go ahead and lay all the way down. Can you get this arm underneath you a little bit? That's what happens when you're, there you go, that's perfect. You're a big guy, you got all kinds of trouble with muscles in the way. But here's the thing. He's laying on his side, his arm is against his side. He's not smashing it there. But the thing you want to watch is that it stays there and doesn't lift up away from his side. Now watch. It's a small motion. Not trying to do a whole bunch of stuff here. Come on down. You can even bring it closer to your stomach. And he's holding his shoulder blade pretty still, so it's all in the shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint, they call it. And that is perfect. What you will commonly see when people want something bigger and fancier out of it, they will mistakenly move their whole shoulder blade. Can you kind of show them that, Josh, where their whole shoulder blade rounds off this way and the whole shoulder blade pinches back? We're not wanting this shoulder blade to move this time. So we're wanting to hold that still, and you'll also see people roll their whole bodies back and forth. We don't want that. And Josh reminded me a minute ago, he's seen people do this and actually move their whole arm up like this. We don't want that. So it's just a nice, careful motion right here, incredibly lightweight. You are not trying to, like I said before, create a ton of muscle or create a powerlifting exercise here. Very controlled, very specific. I want to show you two different variations of a squat. Now, a squat is a complicated exercise, and you need to pay real close attention to make sure you get the most out of it and stay safe. The first version is a wide squat, and all that refers to is the stance, and we're going to use one dumbbell for that. It's a great one to start with. Most people have an easier time squatting down, in other words, folding up their limbs, their levers, their bones and joints, if their feet are wider. Now, notice that Josh, as he put his feet wider, also has his toes pointing slightly out wider than his heels, slightly being the nominative word here. So go ahead and scoot up a little bit closer over the dumbbell. Now he's going to go down and pick it up, which is real important, like we talked about in lifting correctly. Now, he may never go that low again in the squat. He may never go that low. In fact, he could have done that from the stand if he had his stand here. The thing I want you to look at is that as he starts to go down, he sticks his bottom out, keeps his back straight, chest out, and his knees are going the same direction that those feet are going. It's not like going different directions and creating some torque at the knee. And he's going shallow, in other words, not very deep in the beginning, and thinking about his 4 steps. Like watch how he tightens to lower himself, and then re-tightens before he moves. Tightens his hips, tightens his quads, tightens everything to squeeze himself back to the top, and then do it all again. And every time paying attention to how hard all the muscles are working and his perfect positions of where his knees are going, where his back is, where his hips are moving, thinking about all of that good stuff. Now, as you get stronger, you're going to need more than the weight of 1 dumbbell potentially. And that depends on who you are. Realize that when you're starting out, your initial weight has to be something that allows you to do it perfectly. Initially, it can't be much of a challenge, the weight itself, because you got to think about all this stuff, right? So the next one is going to be using 2 weights, and you won't be able to put your legs as wide as before. So I'm going to go ahead and have him pick him up by putting his legs around. Yeah, go ahead and step around, kind of like we did before, and pick him up. And then all you're going to do is put the dumbbells on the outside of the legs, and he can have them maybe shoulder width like that. But again, knees going the exact same direction as the feet. Start by the hips going out the back, chest stays up. Find a short range and learn about how to control it. Nice and controlled. Go down slow again. Tightening, tightening. Now tighten and squeeze your quads on the way back up. Now tighten and lower with the muscles, lower with the muscles, lower with the muscles. There you go. So that 4-step rep again. But notice every rep is perfect. Now watch. Josh can go down lower. He's learned how to do this with control. You too may be able to get to where you can go down this low without altering your back position and without altering your knee alignment. But that will take some time. Don't get in a hurry. Always do it right first. All right, let's take a look at exercises for the lower leg, or for the calf as we commonly hear it called. Now we can do a one-legged version on this, which is really the easiest way to go, because that way you can use one hand to hold on here and only use one weight in the other hand. Now Josh puts his right calf or his right foot on the end of the bench between the wheels, and then he's got the weight in his right hand hanging on here, and notice he's staying nice and straight, nice posture, looking straight ahead, and then controlling it up and controlling it down. So right there at the bottom, let's go through the 4-step rep. Go down. Now tighten, and then squeeze to the top, and then keep trying to go at the top. How high can you go with the muscle? Now let it down with the muscle. It's 1,000 pounds. Now tighten before you move again. Retighten your whole calf. Squeeze it through the top as high as you can. Squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. Now control it down like it's 1,000 pounds. Now listen, if you've never worked calves before, or even if you've done it the normal sloppy way, don't do very many of these the first day. You will be sore and you will not be able to walk if you do too many correctly. So progress slowly, because so many times your muscles haven't been through this much stimulation before. Now you're being efficient. Let's talk about the stiff-legged deadlift. Now this can be a very high-risk exercise also, but you can diminish the risk dramatically by paying attention to what you're doing, what's moving and what's not moving. So pay close attention here. This is one of those exercises where more range is not better range, okay? Now, the whole goal here is to move at the hips. So watch as Josh keeps his back really flat, stop right there, and come back up by pulling with the hamstrings and the glutes. He is not going to just try to touch his toes. He's going to start moving forward real slow by letting the hamstrings do the work and the glutes. So he's not just reaching. In fact, how far he goes down is going to be determined by what he feels back here in his hamstrings and his glutes. And always make sure with the neck that you're letting your head go with your body so you don't go into big extension in the neck, because that can really be uncomfortable. So watch right back here. Go slow for me, Josh. Chest out, let your butt go out the back, move your butt to the rear. There you go. That's real important for keeping the spinal position. And then pull from here, pull from those hamstrings. In fact, don't even start coming back up until you know that those hamstrings specifically and glutes are pulling you into position, the 4-step rep. If you ever choose to do a lunge as a lower extremity exercise, always start with a stationary lunge, so you can learn some very important things like this. Number one, before he even gets in position, do you see the width in his feet right there? They're basically hip width. I want them at that same width even when his feet are separated for the lunge. In other words, I don't want him like he's on a balance board. Make sense? Or a beam, a balance beam, I should say. So go ahead and split front to back. Now, how far forward and how far backwards do you put your feet? we've kind of got to do a trial and error on that, because as you go down, you're going to want to find that if you're in the right position, you can get to about 90-degree bend in the front knee while you're getting to a 90-degree bend in the back knee. So you're going to have to check that a couple times. It should be comfortable in your knees. Now, because you kept the feet set off to the side, the same as hip width, he can let this knee just line up with his toe as he goes down. Again, how far down do you go? That is something you progress up to. Start by going shallow. Just do a shallow one and right back up. Yep. And then even in that shallow one, let's start the 4-step rep. Tighten, control yourself down like you're 1,000 pounds. Tighten and squeeze the muscles back to the top all the way, almost straight. There you go. Now, every time you want to do that, and you'll get to where you'll feel comfortable with that range, and then try to go a little bit lower, we'll progress in terms of range of motion. But keeping that control, and one of the things I want you to look at on your front leg, I want you to go ahead and go all the way straight, but not locked out. Watch Josh's leg, lock out. We don't want that. I don't want him to bend backwards, which is what locking out is, but I do want him to go straight, because we need to learn to control that straight position. Some people will have you not even go to fully straight, but I think that's a little bit of a mistake, because we've got to learn that level of control. So go, now if you're flying through this motion, if you're going down and up really fast, you're not going to know where to stop. So this 4-step rep and the control that it offers will show you to pay attention and tighten to the right position. Unlike the stationary lunge, where we were completely fatiguing one side before we moved to the other, we're going to do some alternating lunges. And the first one is the reverse lunge. And this is one of the best ones in terms of not putting really bad forces on your knees. So watch this. First thing we're going to do is just have Josh already have the weights on each side. And he's going to slowly step back with one leg. And as he steps back, he's going to lower himself a little bit and then step forward and up at the same time. Now again, how far down he goes, that's going to be progressive. He'll start out just going kind of shallow and right up and forward. So it's not like him moving up and then forward. It's all at one time, coming back up to the starting position. How far does he put his back foot when he steps? You're going to have to do the trial and error thing on that a little bit, because you're going to have to see for your size and your leg length how far back you're going to have to step to make it feel right for your knees. Now notice that where he steps when he puts his foot back is still important. He needs to basically put that foot back right behind its starting position. And not to do, let's show him one wrong where you actually put it behind the other foot as you step back. That can end up twisting the front knee if he steps to the side or crosses as he steps backwards. So keep stepping straight back behind where the foot started. Now you can start to use that 4-step rep where you control yourself down and squeeze your way back up to the top. And that's when you really start feeling it. There are two more types of lunges that I really want to talk about, but more because they're a little bit higher risk. This is a forward lunge and a side lunge. Now, I'm not saying you can't do them. You can do pretty much anything you want to. The thing is that we're not going to suggest that you make them a primary part of your exercise routine because of the extra risk involved. Now, I think we'd be negligent if we didn't at least show you the best possible way of doing those things, so let's take a look. The forward lunge is simply instead of taking the foot backwards, we're going to take it forward, watch the alignment, everything's perfect, then as he comes up, he moves backwards into the original position, and he can alternate on this. Now the reason this is a little bit higher risk is because as you throw your foot out there and you land and your knee goes forward, it ends up being a significant increase in forces on the knee that don't necessarily help us with any muscular stimulation. So we could stick with the other lunges and get everything we need out of them, that being the stationary and the reverse. The next lunge we want to talk about is more of a side lunge. And you may have seen these before where people step out to the side. This is even higher risk because as you're moving sideways, people have a tendency to almost roll their knee out to the side, roll their ankle, and it's got all these lateral or sideways forces on a joint that is basically a hinge and trying to go straight ahead. So I would like for you to be very careful with these if you use them at all, and you certainly don't need them to get all the lower extremity stimulation you need. Everybody wants great abdominals. And I've got to start this section by telling you, you better be paying attention.